Good morning, everyone. Dan Bates, President and CEO, Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce, and we're glad you could join us this morning for Coffee and Conversations. This morning, we're going to be hearing from Jamie Bierman, President of HR Elements, and information that everyone needs, and that's avoiding HR landmines. So it's a industry that the rules are constantly changing, and you can't possibly keep up with it without the help of a professional. So we are glad that Jamie is joining us today. So we are on a Zoom meeting. We are also on Facebook Live. So if you are we on Facebook Live, Laura? Also, oh, we're not on Facebook Live. But anyhow, it's going to be recorded. It'll be on our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you need to refer to it or want to share it with somebody, all the information that Jamie's going to give you, you'll have that opportunity. So you know who I am, and let's find out who all of you are. Jason.
Hi,
Jason,
everybody.
you're muted.
Jason with the Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce.
All
And
right. I'm Tiffany Grubb with the Greater Hamilton Chamber. So we have somebody coming in now. Laura,
I'm Laura Merrill with the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
Deanna,
I'm Deanna Cosina with ADG Painting Services.
right? And Focus Consulting, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, how are you doing? Benjamin McCall, Focus Consulting, Human Resources and Leadership Development.
Awesome. Thanks for being here today. And I think that's everyone. So Jamie, you can go ahead with your presentation.
All right, thanks. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you having me this morning. And it's funny, Ben, I don't know if you remember me, but it's been a while, but we have met.
I do.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Thanks for coming out today. So I'm really excited this morning to talk about different things that we're seeing in the HR kind of and really more the landscape from a legal perspective of things that are changing, what to continue to look out for so that we can finish the year of 2025 from a compliant perspective, but also be prepped to stay on top of the right things as we enter 2026. So a couple of different things is just really, we're going to talk about understanding those major compliance shifts, talk about the top HR landmines that we're seeing just from a general landscape, and then kind of give you a head start on, gosh, what should my 90-day action plan be if you're sitting here scratching your head saying, I don't really know if I'm compliant or not. So we're going to talk about compliance, 8 HR landmines, a little bit about the cost of mistakes and why this can really be a big impact to the bottom line of your business or your organization, and actually give you some tips so you can leave with a 90-day plan. So when we think about what we've been seeing from a compliance perspective the last, 2 years, 3 years, is a lot of whiplash. It's kind of that hurry up and wait where we're seeing, oh, they're going to change the FLSA rule and maybe my non-exempt employees are going to become exempt. What's going to happen there? Do I need to treat certain groups of people like pregnant workers differently? How do I know when the law is going to come into effect? And it's not fake news. I'm not going to say that, but there's a lot of headlines that sometimes can make us feel like we're behind the change when the change hasn't even happened yet. The other thing that we're seeing from kind of that federal perspective is more of a shift to state level rules where the government is saying, gosh, here's what we're going to do at the federal level, but states, you can manage these things yourselves. So if you're an employer who has employees in different states, it can be a little stressful and scary. So we want to find the best ways to keep you on top of everything so you know what you need to handle for your employees. So when we think about overtime as kind of that first point, we heard a lot at the end of 2024, and this happened, in 16 or 17 years ago, where we thought the FLSA or the exemption rules were going to change. So we were looking at all of our employees being prepared to see if they're going to be moving to a new salary level or threshold that would be making them exempt or non-exempt. So the salary threshold was $684 a week. And some states, we do see higher thresholds, but this rule was blocked. So again, nothing changed. We've been at that same level for exemption, and didn't need to move employees. But the biggest risks from an overtime perspective, and if you haven't had to be in the weeds with wage and hour laws, they're really sensitive. And years ago, I even had a situation where an employee, they happened to be in Minnesota, was keeping a sheet of paper of times she worked, but didn't record it because she wasn't permitted to work overtime, but she was. Didn't report it. We didn't know. She, years later, gave us this sheet of all of these additional hours that she had in fact worked. And our obligation as the employer was, gosh, we need to pay you. We were in very bad compliance with the wage and hour laws and could have had a very hefty fee. Now, I think a lot of people would have said, how are you supposed to know she was keeping a secret list of times? But it's always the employer's obligation to pay employees for all time worked. So when we think about wage and hour, we always need to make sure we have great ways for people to track their time, approval processes, and managers who are paying attention. So when we see this confusion with the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA, frequently people will decide that somebody, their job is the senior office administrator. Sounds exempt. They're going to get a salary. They rely on the titles and not the duties, where our government and the Fair Labor Standards Act has very specific tools and processes that employers need to use in order to determine if a role, again, the duties, are exempt. And just because you give somebody a salary, that doesn't necessarily mean they're exempt from overtime. And now that we have remote work, I could get a phone call at any moment and that I'm working, right? How are we tracking that? If employees have access to their email when they're off the clock, but they're looking at it, how are we tracking that? Because again, we're required to pay them. So there's a lot of risks and landmines out there from an overtime perspective. And inconsistent classification is going to be the biggest problem that employers are facing. Typically, we're not following the rules to decide how we're going to pay our people, and it creates big issues. And one thing I should have said at the beginning, please, if you have questions about anything, please interrupt, speak up. I would rather talk about it when it's fresh versus waiting until the end. I've baked in time for Q&A, but we can do it as it pops up. So absolutely, with pay and overtime, the requirements didn't change, but just because there wasn't a change, that doesn't mean it's not a great time to go back. Make sure that you have all of your employees classified properly from an exemption perspective based on the Fair Labor Standards Act duties requirements, not just basing it off of a job title and what you think a person should be earning from a salary or an hourly perspective. So what should you do? We need to really audit the classifications. There are two main classifications that we see. And
Right
it's-
now.
Mhm.
Someone have a question? Okay. Two main classifications that we typically see, which is exempt, meaning you do not get overtime, or non-exempt, meaning you do get overtime for any hours worked within a work week that are over 40. You can also, though, have salary non-exempt or or hourly exempt, which of course, those are very more rare. It makes it really confusing. We're going to just focus on the two, which is salary exempt and hourly non-exempt. You also should map your state thresholds. We talked about the federal level of 684 a week, but really, if you have employees outside of Ohio or in any state, you really need to research what their local state level salary requirements are for exempt and non-exempt. Reinforcing timekeeping, making sure that employees understand, hey, if you're not going to finish all of your work within the week and you might need overtime, here's what you need to do in advance. Make sure that employees and supervisors know what needs to happen to get that overtime approval. It's going to pop up now and then, as well as what are those very specific processes for people to track their time in a way that is transparent. Your managers are able to see it, are able to approve it, and that people understand how frequently that timekeeping needs to occur. And then that rationale for whether or not somebody is exempt or non-exempt, that really should be documented and kept so that if you need to explain it, if you need to double check, if God forbid you're audited, you're able to say, well, here's why this position is exempt. These are the duties. This is the job description. And here's my FLSA duties test. And here's why. The safest choice, that annoys a lot of people, but the safest way is always to pay people non-exempt, where they're tracking all their hours worked. They could be eligible for overtime. But of course, the risk to a business is that you're paying overtime for somebody who really may not need it because of the level of their job. I'm going to pause just for a second to see if there are any questions about this. Exemption, overtime.
Seeing anything in the Zoom chat.
Okay.
And just a reminder, if anyone does have a question, you can either verbally ask it or you can write the question in the chat.
All right. So moving on, still on the topic of pay, but we're going to talk about pay transparency. And from a Cincinnati perspective, just locally, a few years ago, probably heard a lot about not asking candidates what they were earning when they were in the interview process. I feel like that is related to what we're talking about here, but when pay transparency is really about posting ranges for positions, this is absolutely during the recruitment process. But what this is going to tell people is, gosh, if I'm a qualified applicant for this position, here's what I should expect to be earning versus the flip side of recruiters or hiring managers saying, well, what would you like? And potentially not having to pay what the job is potentially worth. This is changing significantly where you are required to post positions. I actually was posting an internship the other day, and the handshake system that the universities use requires that. So that was really interesting. Remote positions where, through COVID and post-COVID, we're seeing a lot of remote workers where, gosh, I could be working from my home in California, but my employer could be a company in Pennsylvania. Well, my state laws in California where I live are the ones that are going to govern the rules that my employer needs to follow, even though they're based in Pennsylvania. So we're seeing a lot of multi-state rules based on where employees are actually living and performing their job duties. And there's also a lot of, we've seen it in the market of pay equity. So we want to make sure that people who are having that same level of expertise and experience and qualifications are having equitable pay versus when candidates are coming in and just saying, oh, well, I'm looking for this type of pay. I'm looking for, $50 an hour, where the colleague that may have been there doing the job for 20 years is only earning $40 an hour. We really want to see consistent pay for consistent work. Again, where people are having that same level of qualifications and expertise that they're bringing to the table.
Hey, Jamie.
Yeah.
I know that oftentimes especially it's a little tougher to kind of recommend services or vendors in this round but for a lot of mid-sized and small businesses, oftentimes, hey, to be able to manage risk, to be able to take care and handle this easily, are there any systems or platforms that are better to use if they don't use? So I don't know if you'll get to it, but if there are recommendations that you have on
Yeah.
platform systems, vendors that do this easier than others,
Mhm.
depending on size and maybe cost.
Yeah. So, and that's a great question. So, the biggest issue, I think, when people are trying to determine what a position should be paid is when they're going out to just free, they're not paying for the data, right? So if you go to the free version of salary.com, or if you're trying to find pay data on Indeed, that is, I'm going to use the terminology kind of garbage in, garbage out. These are self-reported data points, which I'd love to believe that everybody's always telling the truth and is super accurate, but unfortunately, that's just not the way with self-reported data. So you want to make sure that you're using a vendor that has validated salary surveys that they're getting from employers and that the data is refreshed frequently. I've used a lot of different vendors in the past 20 years, and there's a couple of different things, pardon me, that I see employers doing is one, they participate in pay surveys. So these could be maybe something from Mercer. Sometimes you'll see different industry organizations. A lot of like nonprofits participate in the nonprofit salary surveys. And in exchange for participating in the survey, you receive a copy of the results. So that's a great way to get some properly reported and collected data at no charge. So look at your industries to see if there are organizations or agencies that are putting on those surveys. If you are an organization that maybe is more of a national scope, or you're recruiting from other kind of national companies and you need to know state and local types of comp, there is a paid version of salary.com. There's another website, I think it's called PayScale. My favorite is ERI. And you can subscribe to different levels and get the data. There's also organizations, I know MRA will provide salary data, local HR consulting firms, we do it, but you just need to make sure that you have paid data versus free data that you're finding yourself.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah. From a pay transparency, landmines and fixes. So again, huge landmine is inconsistent ranges. If you don't have any type of pay bands or pay scales, that's going to be a problem because you're going to have ranges that are a little bit like, if you look at a heart monitor, it's going to be a little inconsistent. And that's also going to create potentially unrealistic ranges, especially if it's more employee led versus agency or employer led. And you're also going to get internal compression. So what internal compression is when you see employees who've been within a company or a job for many, many years. Think about kind of a typical merit where, okay, my pay may increase by 3%, 5% if I'm lucky every year. That's going to grow really slow over time. And so if we have a candidate that comes in from the outside and is like, here's what I earn, we may have a situation where newer employees to the organization are getting salary levels that are higher than those long timers. So we always want to do a look at what our incumbents or our current employees are earning when we're bringing somebody else in for the same position. And we also need to look at what their expertise and experiences have been to make sure we're being fair and equitable. So the fixes to avoid these HR landmines are having those standardized pay bands. You'll typically see a pretty broad range. It's going to be kind of entry level to that senior expert, but it's going to help you identify where people should be falling within that band for the jobs that they're doing. Another great thing to do is a pay equity review, either on an annual or maybe even a biannual basis, where you're taking a peek at where everybody in the organization is from a comp perspective to see if you have any equity issues. Things that you're going to be looking for are maybe genders or people from different backgrounds or races who maybe aren't earning the same as people, other groups, right? We don't want that to be why earnings are distributed. But also just looking at people to make sure, gosh, they've been here for a really long time doing the same thing, and their comp is now out of range because we're just giving them those small incremental merit increases year over year. The other thing to do is really to train your leaders. If you don't have an internal HR department or somebody who's helping you with comp, you need to make sure that the managers at your employer understand how comp works so that they're looking at it the right way and making educated decisions versus paying based off of what maybe they feel the market is telling them to. So we're going to move on now to the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So this is going to cover pregnancy-related limitations. So, years and years ago, you came to work if you couldn't perform your job because maybe you had really bad morning sickness or you had to go on bed rest, right? There were different short-term disability leaves that would kick in. But we're seeing a big switch to be that Workers Fairness Act that's going to cover pregnancy-related limitations. So this could be things that really impact pregnant workers during that temporary period. And it does require accommodations, just like you're probably used to hearing with the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. So this is, again, that interactive process that is required where the employer is asking you, what do you need in order to meet the requirements of your job? This could be something as simple as, gosh, maybe we need to provide a different type of workstation or more frequent breaks for the restroom, or to get up and walk around, just different types of rest periods even, to help people as they progress throughout their pregnancy. So again, thinking about landmines and best practices with this, do not require that somebody is 100% healed. That could be either from, if you're having morning sickness, like, well, you can come back when that's gone. Well, they're probably able to work intermittently or maybe during different periods of the day. So that would not work. And also forcing leave unnecessarily. If we had an employee, and again, I'm making this situation up, but maybe they have really bad, like, swollen feet at the end or ankles and they're having some issues there. If we said, well, gosh, sounds like you need to go out on leave, but the employee isn't saying, I'd like to go on leave because of these issues, we could be creating a violation to the PWFA. Maybe they need a footrest or a stool or to be able to lay down every couple of hours for 15 minutes to help with the swelling. Again, this is where we want to have that interactive process where the employer is saying, what do you need in order to perform your job? What do you need in order for this to work so that somebody's not just gone out on leave when they don't really need it? Best practices, got to make sure your handbook is up to date for the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. Make sure that your supervisors understand how the interactive process works. And also, we really want to fast track those accommodations. This isn't going to be a situation where, oh, geez, we're realizing we have an employee who can't, has mobility issues and can't make it up the steps into our office, and we need to put in a ramp or an elevator. This is going to be something that's a lot faster in making decisions, like a break time or a footrest or, easy to accommodate types of things. And I do want to just touch on the supervisor training. The reason that supervisor training is so important is because so frequently we as human beings want to help the others alleviate the issue. And supervisors very frequently will come up with the accommodations to help, thinking they're doing the right thing. But that's not what we want them to do. We want the employee and their doctor or physician to say, here's what is needed in order for, Susan to make it the rest of the way through her pregnancy at work. And it's really hard, I think, at times to just sit and, wait and have somebody ask for something when we're so used to wanting to give and to help. Any questions about this?
Jamie, I have a question
Yeah.
about the Pregnancy Act.
Mhm.
So, what would you say would be reasonable accommodations if a company maybe is not set up for their employees who are pregnant or going on pregnancy leave? How would you say they can start to make it more inclusive for that employee?
Um, I I guess I'm a little confused by the question. So from an inclusive perspective, we want to make sure that our policies have the language for that we follow the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. And then I think when an employee says, "Hey, I'm expecting," I think it's a good opportunity to say, "Okay, great, keep us posted on how things are going." Frequently, we'll want to talk to the employee about their upcoming, leave, assuming it's to deliver in advance, giving them all the paperwork they need, prepping for that time off. But if an employee is saying, gosh, I'm having these issues, that is where we want to say, how can we help? Instead of just saying, oh, that's too bad. I think that when we see bigger employers, we're seeing things like lactation rooms and in areas for, working moms that most of us aren't going to have. So I think it is, again, hard to sit and wait knowing that, gosh, somebody might be having an issue. And we need to always say, how can we help? What can we do to help you? And I think that's the best way to be inclusive.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. The interactive
Jamie,
process, tough.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
One of them is kind of going the other direction. What if, the employee is requesting things that the employer either can't do or thinks is unreasonable?
Yeah. So the interactive process doesn't necessarily mean that you say yes. And I'll give an example of this. So I had a client a few years ago where we had an employee who was pregnant and was having horrible morning sickness, and so the request was, well, I want to work from home. And we were a 100% in-person organization. And I said, well, help me to understand more about why your doctor thinks working at home is going to fix your morning sickness, because the key in any interactive process is still meeting the requirements of your position. And what the employee said to me is, well, I just want to take my laptop into the bathroom with me so I can have it opened. And that is not working. That is having your laptop nearby. Working is thinking, engaging, handling customer service tickets, responding to people. And just because your computer's near you, that doesn't mean you're working. So we denied that request because that wasn't reasonable. She wasn't performing the requirements of her job.
Okay.
And so the simple request is, we can't do that. Is there anything else that your doctor suggests or that you need? But you don't always have to say yes, especially if the accommodation request doesn't actually fulfill them performing their job still.
Okay, that helps clarify. Then I have another question
Yeah.
that is probably completely off target, but and because I know you're talking about the Pregnancy Act and all that.
Yeah.
What if an employee like suffers an injury or something like that that is a temporary situation, or has a surgical procedure
Yeah.
or something? Does it work the same way as far as still being able to perform the duties?
So I love this question, actually. And at the core of everything, when we're looking at an accommodation or an employee who says, I need this in order to do my job. That is absolutely always the interactive process. Now, when we have an employee who is injured, something that always kind of makes an impact here is one, is this injury that they sustained because it happened during the course of their work? Do we need to be engaging with the workers' compensation? And that's a whole different ball of wax.
Yeah,
If
I'm thinking something outside of work.
Okay, let's say somebody broke their leg, okay, and their job is a desk position and they're able to come in on crutches, do their job, but they need a footrest. Other than that, great, but maybe they aren't able to lift the big filing boxes that they have to pull. That would be a situation where, gosh, it's really important for us to probably let this person come in and do their job. We need them to perform their duties, but is there somebody else who could push the files over for them? They can't lift it. We would want to do that. Now, if the person says, gosh, I had this really severe femur break and I can't come in at all. Can you let me work remotely? They don't really fall under the ADA because it's temporary. And so we would want to really understand for us as the company, spending all that money, giving them a new laptop, like, are we able to do this versus just having them out on an approved leave of absence, paid or unpaid, for 6 weeks or whatever until they can come back? A lot of times you'll see short-term disability or other types of personal leave of absence policies that will help clarify when an employee has an injury outside of work. And it's really going to be a decision between the leadership and maybe an HR person to say, what's the best option for the company and the employee based on this situation. And there's not always a hard or fast rule if it's a temporary out of work injury. Does that
Thank
help?
you.
Sure.
I have a question about concerning the pregnancy.
Yeah.
About a year ago, I had an employee that was pregnant, and what if she didn't want to make any accommodations, but we're physical labor, it's cleaning,
Mhm.
and you got to lift, you got to bend down, just a lot of physical activity. And I wanted her to make some accommodations because I felt like she needed to, but she didn't want to do anything different. How would that
So
have been handled?
that's a good question. So, again, the last thing we as an employer want to do is say, hey, it looks like you need to take a leave. We always want to look at it from the perspective of fulfilling the duties of their job. So if this person in the course of cleaning wasn't doing all of the parts of their position that they're required to do, that's an opportunity for a performance discussion where you can, maybe that person's like, well, I can't do that anymore because I'm pregnant. Okay, well, what can we do in order to help you? Because again, our employees are employed in order to perform their jobs. If they're not doing that, we need to hold them, accountable. And the first part is always saying, hey, did you notice that you're not fulfilling every part of your job? Let's
Yeah.
talk about this. What's going on? How can I help? How can we help? What do you need? And hopefully, typically employees will talk to their doctor. Sometimes if an employee is just not getting it, I always will say, gosh, it sounds like maybe we need to have a fitness for duty conversation. Can you get your doctor to confirm that you're safely able to perform all of the parts of your job? It says you have to lift 50 pounds here. We just really want to make sure that we're keeping you safe because we don't want them to get hurt, but we also need them to do their job. So being able to have a conversation or get them to discuss with their doctor, gosh, this is what my job is, and I'm supposed to lift 50 pounds. Is that something I should be doing since I'm, in the 7th month of my pregnancy? And that may kickstart that interactive conversation.
Okay, yeah, she did her job well still. I just was more worried about her hurting herself.
Yeah. And this is where it's hard because we see people and we want to help, but as an employer, we don't ever want to suggest an accommodation. And as weird as it feels, that's a different type of violation of the pregnancy
Okay,
workers.
that's good to know. Okay.
Yeah.
It worked out, but I was just
Good.
more, it
Good,
was just
good,
more
good.
of a concern. So, yeah.
It sometimes goes against human nature. We want to help, we want to keep them safe. And if we notice somebody and we think they're struggling, it's human nature to say, let me do that for you. Let me make it better. But as an employer, we really shouldn't do that until that interactive process starts. All right. I'm going to transition now to the paper that haunts all employers, and it is the I-9. If you are an employer and you have employees working for you and you don't know what the I-9 is, that is a problem. This is a form that every employee should be filling out, but within the first 3 days of their employment with a business. And basically, the purpose of the I-9 is to verify that an employee is eligible to work without any type of special kind of visa or sponsorship within the United States. This is something that started in the very late 80s and is a highly regulated process. If you have employees who are remote, so you're not able to engage with them in person, to look at their documentation, you can sign up for a free process called E-Verify that is handled by the government, and it will allow you to, look at somebody's documentation and record the information over a Zoom meeting just like this or a Teams meeting. But the biggest thing is that people do not know how to fill these forms out, and there are very specific rules, and it creates big audit risks, which can lead to fines. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more. So, landmines, using old forms that have expired, having an inconsistent process for remote employees. Something else that I see often is sometimes getting a copy of the IDs and sometimes not, and also where you're storing the I-9s. A great fix is if you're not sure what your I-9s look like, consider a mini audit where you can look at a certain percentage or a pool of your employees, be able to make sure, gosh, do we use the right form for that year? Are all of the pieces of the form filled out? Are we putting the Section 2 identification in properly? Are we keeping copies? Standardize your workflows. So when a new hire is started, are you telling them about the I-9? Are you having it present on their first day? Is it part of their day one orientation? Who's filling it out? Who's signing it for the employer? And make sure that you have separate I-9 storage. Frequently, people will make a big mistake and put the I-9 in the employee file, and that is a big no-no. You want to have all of your I-9s separate. They're just in an I-9 storage location, and they should also be separated by active and terminated. You need to make sure that you keep terminated I-9s for a period of either 1 year after the date of termination or 3 years from the first day of work, whichever is longer, which means every I-9 is going to have a very individual retention period, and it can be a little tricky and hard to know how to store them if you haven't been properly trained. AI. I'm sure you're all not tired at all of hearing about AI. So scrutiny is here within AI. We are seeing a lot of AI algorithms and fixes to say, save some time. Let AI screen your candidates. Let AI look at all of the resumes. And that way you don't have to have somebody that does that. It'll save you tons of time. And while that may sound appealing if you are hard pressed to hire people and don't have a full HR team, AI isn't perfect, and the EEOC is currently reviewing algorithms to see if there is potential bias where candidates are being unnecessarily screened out from these AI bots. And regardless of who you're using, what type of systems, employers, the hiring company is always liable, even if you outsource this to a third party. And we want to make sure that there is accessibility for everybody to different job postings to apply. So the landmines, having blind trust in your vendors, and having impact reviews. We want to look at what has changed while using new vendors or tools. Are we seeing less applicants from different parts of town or with different types of backgrounds or experience? Are we seeing that, geez, now we're only seeing women, we're not getting any men applying? What's going on? So always have safeguards. Do an inventory of the AI. Look at it as a human being through the lens of what you would really expect to make sure that your AI tool is operating the way you also would operate. It just is saving time. Do validation studies to test it. See if it is actually valid in screening out or screening in the right types of candidates, and always have a human review. Maybe you use certain types of AI, like a questionnaire where it auto screens out people, but check and make sure that it's working the right way as a human being. Don't fully trust the robots yet.
Well, and just to add something in,
Yeah.
as an FYI, knowing that the employer is always assumes liability and responsibility. If anyone's familiar with Workday, Workday earlier this year had a huge lawsuit that just got approved to go further. And basically, there was an employee or a candidate that was applying to multiple jobs and noticed that Workday was sending him notices of denial quickly, like within 24 hours. So now every employer that uses Workday has the potential to assume that risk as a result of this lawsuit. So just be mindful, you're always responsible.
Yeah. You always want, and thank you, Ben, you always, as the employer, want to make sure that you are aware of what your tools and systems are doing. You need to review the rules. You need to engage and look at the resumes whenever possible. So unless you are just inundated, I think that doing like maybe some screening tools where candidates are saying, yes, I have this, or no, I don't. I would always suggest before any rejection email goes out that human eyes are there as a safeguard double check, especially in the beginning if you're trying something new. All right. So non-competes. So the FTC ban was blocked. And I think you probably heard about this. It was from different judges where they're saying, gosh, you know what? Non-competes are still viable. And this has been an age-old discussion for years and years. So state laws are really going to govern the enforceability of whether or not a non-compete is viable. So non-solicit and confidentiality agreements are also still viable. And that's, I will say, what I'm seeing most of is non-solicit agreements. You can't come after our employees. You can't contact our clients for a period of certain times. You have to keep things that you learned confidential. That's very, I'd say, commonplace for employers. The non-compete, whether or not a person who exits your business can work within that same industry or service. The issue that we're facing is whether or not we're preventing people from earning a living, right? And that's why this whole thing popped up. Was there a question? Okay. So the landmine, again, is assuming non-competes are irrelevant. Or having one size fits all agreement. So if you have every employee in your company sign the same type of thing, that could be a problem. We really want to make sure it's appropriate for the job that they're doing, the information that they have, and what potential harm they could have on your business if they were to leave your employment and go to somebody who is a competitor. So alternatives. Really strengthen the confidentiality clauses and make sure that you're protecting your data, your information, and that it's kind of on an almost need to know. Employees always need to have the information to perform their job, but not every employee might need the entire client list or contact information, things like that. Also, if you have employees outside of just Ohio, you should probably customize your agreements by state, making sure that you're fulfilling those legal requirements. In some states, you might even need to give consideration, which is some type of a payment or an exchange, in order to give or ask for them to sign an agreement if it's after their initial offer of employment. So if you're changing your agreements now or are all of a sudden putting a non-solicit in place, you might not legally be permitted to just say, hey, you need to sign this, where in other states it can merely be a condition of continuing employment that somebody sign an agreement if they're already an employee of your business. EEO1. So EEO1 and pay data. This is something that started popping up, about 5 years ago. And COVID really did create a lot of confusion to this. We saw the deadlines. This used to always be something that happened in March, and now the deadlines seem to be kind of all over the place. They're very strict. We're seeing email only notifications. So years ago, you may have received a notice at your business that, hey, here's your EEO1 filing number. Here is the deadline. And those have really switched only to email. So if you are expecting it, you have over 100 employees, or you are a federal or state contractor with less than that, and you're not receiving notifications about this really fun annual filing, you're probably missing something and need to reach out. And state pay data reporting is expanding. So in certain states, they are requiring that in conjunction with saying what gender and race, we also need to report earnings by group, which can really change the ease that some HR systems have put in place for filing this report. So the landmines, unclear ownership. We need to know, one, do we do the EEO1? Are we required to file it? Do we know who's going to receive the email invitation? And also having bad demographic data. I worked years ago for an international manufacturer. They did not have a system that accurately recorded how many employees they had by race, by gender, in different job codes. And we used the terminology, it's time to go count the belly buttons, like on a hash sheet, because we didn't have a system that properly stored it. Oh, and you have to know if they're over 40 or under 40. So that could be a really, really big deal if you don't have that stored safely and accurately. So good fixes are to assign an owner, have annual data cleanup, make sure you know if you're required to have this, that you have a good way to track it. And typically it's always going to go back to your HR and payroll data. You're going to know how old people are. You may or may not know what their race is based on the size of your organization, and you should not guess. You should not guess. So this really gets us to the multi-state patchwork. Every state, now that we know, they're really being encouraged to enforce the rules themselves versus at the federal level for certain things that we're seeing a lot of differences where minimum wage is different, and that could even be at certain city levels. There's state-specific changes for if you're exempt, if you're non-exempt, how do we pay, how do we record time? Leave of absence laws and rules are changing. So we talked about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, but in a state like California, there's mandatory family leave requirements that employers are required to fill. So if you have an employee in California, they're going to have a whole different leave process than an employee in Ohio or Kentucky. And having remote workers really amplifies an employer's exposure because you really need to understand the local rules and laws where that person lives. And they might be really different than the way you've always operated, but you're required to fulfill them. So when we think about multi-state compliance, map the worker locations, know where you have employees, and the highest standard wins is a really safe approach. And so what that means is looking at, gosh, here's where our business operates, and here's where this employee lives and fulfills their job, performs their job. Whichever one provides the employee with the biggest benefit is where you should operate out of. So if you have better leave rules because you're an Ohio employee and you have, or excuse me, an Ohio employer and you have an employee in Tennessee and they would benefit more from the local in Ohio, that's the way we should approach it. Have state addendas. So if you have one handbook and then all of a sudden, let's say we hire somebody in Illinois, we're going to want to do an Illinois addendum to the handbook so that we are compliant with that state rule. And a compliance calendar is always a great idea. We want to know when it's time for certain filings. We want to know if we all of a sudden have to fill out ACA or ADA or EEO reports. Do research to understand where you're required to file. So at the beginning, we talked about the cost. There's always going to be direct costs, which are penalties, legal fees. If you have an audit and you fail it, that's going to be the penalty. You're going to usually have to hire an attorney to help you navigate this, make sure that you're able to maybe negotiate down a little bit. The indirect costs sometimes are higher. You may have turnover, you may have lower morale or employees who are like, gosh, they're not paying us well. Why are we here? Let's go somewhere different. They're not following the rules. And the opportunity cost here is huge. If you have a filing because you didn't do I-9s and all of a sudden you are having to go to all of your employees, get them to fill out the forms, you're trying not to pay fines, you're not really doing your job. You're not running your business. You're putting out fires. So that opportunity cost is really huge. You may not be focusing on sales or bringing in new clients, which is probably going to be a big problem. So when we think about, okay, you've scared me a little. What do I do now? Here's a general kind of high level 90-day compliance plan. The next 30 days, try to classify what types of employees do I have? Do I pay everybody a salary? Do I need to look at that? Do I have job descriptions? What states do I have people in? Do I have good I-9s that were filled out the right way for every employee that I have? Where do I keep my I-9s? Are they in the files? Are they in a binder? Are they non-existent? Really just gather and understand what your landscape looks like from a compliance perspective. From there, it's probably a great idea to try and find pay ranges or create them. See where your employees fall within them. Do an equity check. Are you using AI? Do we trust it? Have we done that human double check? And then make sure your handbook is up to date. It's good for all of the new laws that have come in place the past few years. If you haven't reviewed your handbook, at least in the last 2 years, that's probably an issue. There's going to be some non-compliant things. What other types of templates are you using? Where are your managers and supervisors getting their documents? And do some training. So gather, review, and implement is kind of the way that I would move through this. 90 days is is short. If you don't have somebody dedicated to do this, you really should put together a plan, because if you find a mess, it could take a while to clean up, especially if you don't know the right way to do it. So I'll pause. I'm here if there are any additional questions. I know we have 3 minutes left in our time. Is there any additional info or clarity that I can provide?
Brenda Savage just wrote, does a nonprofit need an I-9 for contractors?
Okay, that's a great question. So I-9s are only for employees. So you do not want to do an I-9 on a contractor. If somebody is not being paid through your payroll system, don't want to do an I-9 with them. Now, you want to make sure that whoever their employer is, so if you use like an agency, they should be doing I-9s. If it's a 1099 contractor, that would not be within scope.
So, Jamie, I have a question. With everything constantly changing and expenses, I know employers are struggling to keep up with health insurance costs and all kinds of things that are, killing the bottom line. So, what are the guidelines if an employer has to, change the benefit package?
So the ACA is always what we're going to kind of look at from a benefits package. And it really is talking about what are those mandatory required benefits. And it's for different sized employers. So if you're small, you may not necessarily be required to even provide employee benefits. If you need to make a change in the middle of it, my advice is always to make sure that you have a great benefit broker partner who's able to ensure that you're following the rules, that you are compliant for the size of your business, and that if you are providing benefits, that you're doing it in the right way. We always see kind of these scary situations that always tend to happen from employers trying to do the right thing, like paying for everybody's individual marketplace plan on a credit card. That's a problem because it's going to impact taxes for their employees. And now they're like in a big mess, right? All they wanted to do was provide health care for their employees. Bottom line, know the requirements. If you don't have a broker partner that's working with you, there's a lot of really great benefit brokers around here, and you don't pay them. They get paid based off of the benefits commissions that they're putting in place for you. So they always want to give you great advice and may end up actually taking some of the work off your plate. That's from a benefits perspective, make sure you have a broker.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions right now? All right.
I'm not seeing anything right here. And keep in mind, everybody, we're going to be sending out a recap with Jamie's contact information and a link for today's presentation. Jamie, was there anything else that you would like to add or wrap up the presentation?
I just want to say thank you so much. I know some of this is like a big jumble of confusion, but always happy to help. Always also, you can go out to SHRM if you want information. They have a lot of really great resources too. Just make sure you're getting your information from a validated source, and that doesn't always mean Googling it. So
I just want to interject. I just want to interject here, Jason. I think this has been an amazing presentation, great information. And Jamie, we're going to, Laura, just so you know, and Tiffany, I want to, put this in our blog and a link to this in our next e-newsletter because it's very timely as we wrap up the year and start 2026. And I think that this has been extremely informative and directional. So thank you.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I really appreciate the time and attention this morning. So thank you all so
Absolutely.
much.
And Dan, I wholeheartedly agree. Jamie, thank you for taking the time. I know that we were anticipating this for months. You had signed up to do this months ago. This was such a flawless and thoughtful and informative presentation. So like I said, I'm going to be sending out a recap to everyone that attended today. I'll get with Tiffany. We'll put this in our blog as well. Um, for those that want to keep in touch with the chamber, we've got some upcoming events. So we do have a networking leads lunch on December 16th. That's going to be at Megumi Sushi. We invite all of you to attend. Our networking events are always really, really fun. You may make a lot of great connections. Later that day, we have a ribbon cutting at Cornerstone Caregiving. On December 19th, we have a ribbon cutting with Ohio Kids Dental as well. If you are interested in joining the chamber, you can head to hamilton-ohio.com. You can also reach out to me, Jason, at hamilton-ohio. We are wrapping up the year. We have a lot of exciting things coming up for next year, so we'll be announcing those very, very shortly. Everyone, thanks so much for joining us today and have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.